Okay, we'll bring the February 6, 2020 Board of Adjustment meeting to order. Madam Secretary, roll call, please.
Clay Thomas,
Here.
Christina Hill,
Here.
Lee Lawrence, Brad Stanley, and Kim Toulouse.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Will we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Ms. Hill, could you lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Ethics law announcement, Mr. Large.
Board members are reminded that if with respect to any matter or any person coming before the board today, you have received a gift or loan, you have a pecuniary interest, you have a commitment in a private capacity such as a family, employment, business, or similar relationship, or you provide a representation or counseling before an agency to a person or entity for compensation within the last year on a matter being considered, you must disclose that gift, loan, interest, commitment, or prior representation at the time the matter is being considered, and you must furthermore abstain from the deliberation or voting on the matter if it is clear that the gift, loan, interest, commitment, or prior representation would materially affect the independence of judgment of a reasonable person. Board members are also reminded that under the Board of Adjustment rules, if you had a contact outside this meeting with any person interested in a matter coming before the board today, you should disclose the nature of that contact at this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Large. Appeal procedure, Mr. Lloyd.
Most decisions rendered by the Board of Adjustment are appealable to the Board of County Commissioners. If you disagree with the decision of the Board of Adjustment and you want to appeal its action, you may do so in writing within 10 calendar days from the date that the decision being appealed is signed by the Secretary of the Board of Adjustment and mailed to the original applicant in the proceeding being appealed in accordance with Washoe County Code. Please call the planning staff immediately at 328-6100 for information on the appeal procedure and the application fee.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Next is general public comment. Any person is invited to speak on any item on or off the agenda during this period. Action may not be taken on any matter raised during the public comment period until the matter is specifically listed on the agenda as an action item. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone wishing to speak at this time?
We have Judy Miller.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Thomas and other honorable members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm a member of the Incline Village Crystal Bay Citizens Advisory Board, but I am speaking today as an individual. In fact, that's the only way we can speak at this point, because in recent years, I think since about 2018, our agenda has changed so that we can no longer vote to recommend an approval or a denial of any project. According to staff, the way the agenda is written, it would be an open meeting law violation for us to do otherwise. I've actually sent an email to our Board of County Commissioners. Is that Chair Hartung back there by any chance, or somebody that looks like him? Anyway, I am hopeful that that language will be reversed so that in the future we can come with a unified voice when we feel that a project should be either fully supported or we would recommend a denial. But we can't do that at this time. So instead, as individuals, we write our worksheets, and I hope that you've all received mine. Apparently it was left out of the staff report, so I sent it myself. But hopefully in the future, we will again vote as a board. I think it gives a much better picture to this board. I know the Planning Commission wasn't aware of that. They said, oh, was there a recommendation from the CAB? And unfortunately, the unfortunate thing is we cannot vote as a board. So anyway, I did make that request, and I hope you understand that as I'll be speaking later today. Again, it's as an individual, but I think if you were at the meeting or if you had any questions about that meeting, I was there. I'd be happy to fill you in with any other information I could provide. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, is there anyone else wishing to speak at this time?
We have no other further public comment.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and close public comment. And next item on the agenda is possible action to approve the agenda. Before we get too far in depth on this, I should bring it to the board's attention that two of the items listed on the agenda have been removed, have been pulled at this time. One is the Summit Christian Church, and the other is the Sun Valley North Cellular Tower. So we will not be hearing those today. With that, is there any discussion on approving the agenda? Yes.
Mr.
Clues.
Chair, just a quick comment. If there's anyone in the audience here to comment on those two projects, they can still have that ability to do so today, correct?
I believe that is correct, yes. We will give them the opportunity to speak.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll move to approve the minutes as written.
I'm sorry, this is the agenda?
I mean, the agenda is written.
Thank you. Is second?
Second.
Ms. Hill, all in favor?
Aye. And actually, let me clarify that motion. I said as written, and I should have said as amended.
As amended. Before we move on, Mr. Large, maybe you can help us out. Is it probably appropriate at this time to ask if anybody wishes to speak on that topic before we move off that? Or
Mr. Commissioner, you can open the, Mr. Chairman, you can open the comment period to see if there's any public comment on Summit Christian Church. as it says
Thank you,
on the
Mr.
agenda.
Large. Okay, we'll go ahead and do that at this time. Again, items A and E have been postponed on this agenda item. If there's anyone wishing to speak on this matter, we will go ahead and hear that at this time. Do we have anyone from the audience wishing to speak on either the Summit Christian Church or the Sun Valley North Cellular Tower? Excellent. Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and close that. Next is possible action to approve the December 5th, 2019 draft minutes. Is there any discussion from the board on that? None? No? Ms. Hill?
I had one question. On public comment, it said Gino Stoll said he is a permanent resident and lives par 5 to the proposed site. It's on page 4 of 18. I didn't know what par 5, is that like the size of a par 5 golf hole, or, I don't know what that meant. So, just wanted to bring that up.
I believe, if I remember correctly, and I believe he said, yeah, he is a permanent resident, and I believe his property backed up to I thought it was the 5th hole, I believe is what it was. So I don't know if that
Oh,
helps you.
the 5th hole.
Right.
So
He
it was
was-
a par
he-
5 golf course hole?
I'm assuming so, but I think what I
Okay.
remember him saying is that he was at the actual 5th hole, or backed up to the 5th hole,
Okay,
so.
okay, thanks.
Will that suffice?
Yes.
Thank you. Any other comments on the approval of the minutes? I'll accept a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second?
All right, Ms. Hill, thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Next up on the agenda is a planning item. It's number 8. It's special use permit case WSUP 18-0017, the Soule grading. I believe Ms. Olander has taken that on. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Julie Olander with Planning and Building. As some of you might remember, this item came before you in 2018, and we were asked to bring it back. That was one of the conditions, to bring it back to you and give you an update on the conditions. So that, just to remind you, it was on October 4th, 2008, that the board approved the grading permit on the Soule property with conditions, and one of the conditions was to bring it back to you. And also to remind you, the property is where the property is located, it's off of Welcome Way, which is up Zalesi, before Zalesi turns. Here's an overhead of the property. When the item was brought before you, there were 3 parcels for this property owner. He has since come in and created the 2 parcels where the creek is located into one large parcel, where he is now beginning to construct a residence at that location. And just to give you some background on the item, it was in August, really it was in May, I apologize for that mistake there. The code enforcement, we started receiving calls about the grading in that area. Code enforcement went out there A violation was issued, they issued a stop work order, and then the property owner was then came in, so he already had started grading, but then he came in and applied for the special use permit after we talked to him through the code enforcement process. And then again, I stated on the 4th of October, you approved the SUP with conditions. This is what it looked like in August of 2018. And you can see that he had already graded a portion of along the stream there. And then he came in a little bit later and graded some more and took out more trees. This is in September. And then this is what he's done to restore the site. This is taken in November. He's gone in and put in some trees. He's done some rock work around the stream and other places on the property. I just was out there on Monday and I took these pictures. Oops, this is still from November. Not much has changed since November. It was just a little bit different. So this is another view of the property. You can see where he's put the rock walls in. That's for the house. That was not part of the grading permit. So, but this is just a view showing how the stream is still flowing. And, oops, I thought I had one more picture in there. I apologize. So you can see that he has put in various trees throughout the property. He's put in a different seed mix where it looks brown dirt. There is a seed mix there. And I'm basically available for questions. I do want to state that staff has reviewed the conditions of approval with the different agencies that were involved in the conditions, planning and engineering here in Washoe County and also the state. And the conditions that we have are fairly well, have been responded to. Some of the state conditions are still in process. Nevada Department of Environmental Protection, NDEP, is still reviewing the violations on the property, and their letter, excuse me, their letter is included in your packet. Also, the Corps of Engineers is still reviewing the process too. So their processes are separate than ours. However, I talked to NDEP this morning. They are still reviewing the violations and do not have conclusion of that. The SWIP process that they had to set up with NDEP is ongoing and will continue to be ongoing until NDEP either removes it, tells the property owner they can remove those weekly inspections or not. I'm basically just here available for questions, so I'm going to conclude my short presentation on that and see if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Olander. Are there any questions? Ms. Hill, go ahead.
Julie, will you continue to provide us updates? This isn't the end of his due diligence, is it? He's got to continue to restore the site.
So from the county's perspective, he's accomplished that for our conditions. The NDEP process is a little bit different, and they have different requirements. I'm not going to speak for them. We had talked about having them here. I'm not sure if that would really help this process. But from the county's perspective, the conditions of approval that you all approved have been met as far as we can complete. Some of the engineering comments had to do with the state and federal agencies. Those are still ongoing and will continue to be ongoing until they are satisfied with the process. But from the county's perspective, he has gone back in and repaired the areas that were disturbed. He's brought in a grading permit showing what the work that was supposed to do done on the property. And that permit is still, it has been issued, it's still open. There's still a few things he needs to complete. And I was talking to someone in building this morning because he's also building the residence, and there's been some issues on that there's still some open, that permit has not been issued. Typically, my understanding is from building is they will go in, the building inspector will go in and make sure all the permits are completed that are on the property before they either final them or give them a C of O. I'm going to put a condition in on the building permit that everything is complete, that planning has signed off on the building permit and made sure that all all of our conditions are completed
For this project?
for the
the
grading. But the house is a separate, the house is just a building permit.
Right.
Yes, Mr. Toulouse.
Ms. Olander, I cannot disagree with you more that the conditions of approval have been met. And in the staff report and in a number of areas, it says that the conditions of approval have not been met. Copies of permits have not been provided. The work was not completed within 6 months. There's a fence that was specifically prohibited in the conditions of approval that exists on the property now. There's no way that he has met the conditions of approval. In addition to that, when you go through this, the documentation, and I went through all of the documentation provided to us, I went back and watched the video of the meeting where we approved the special use permit. What has been done out there is not anywhere near what was presented to us in the Board of Adjustment meeting. It's not even close. There's riprap where there was no riprap or trade in the restoration plan. There were a number of plantings that were supposed to occur, including yellow willow, mountain alders, a number of plants. I don't see those in the pictures. A number of trees were supposed to be planted, and we were supposed to be provided with that information. Where is it? It's not in here. There is a reference to the seed mix and a reference to some other plantings that did occur, but how many large caliper trees were put back on the property? It's not even close to what was represented to us, and I have a huge issue with that. I've got numerous notes in here that I could refer to, and those would be best in speaking to the applicant. Is the applicant here today?
No, he chose not to be here.
Well, I have a huge problem with that. And he was supposed to be back here in October of last year. The applicant was supposed to be here in October of last year to present us with updated information. We're almost 4 months out from that date, and the applicant is not even here. So I would really recommend that we return this back to code enforcement and pursue some enforcement activity against the applicant, because it's not anywhere near what was represented to us. And in my view, the conditions of approval have not been met. They've been willfully violated, and we need to return it back to code enforcement.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, once again, this item is not scheduled for action at this time.
And I understand that, Mr. Large. I would like to see it on the next board meeting agenda as an action item, so we can take some action on it and refer it back for code enforcement.
If that's okay with the DA here, I'll respond to that. We will certainly bring this back before this board. It is certainly up to this board to see what your purview is in this regard, determining of whether or not you feel that your conditions that were imposed by the board were or are adhered to. And again, we have no commitment from the applicant in terms of their return, but we will bring this back for further discussion at the next meeting.
Okay, so let me ask you another question then, Mr. Lloyd. One of the conditions of approval was that the applicant return in October of 2019 to give us an updated report. That is a condition of approval that has not been met. So in my view, if the conditions of approval have not been met, the permit should be revoked and we should take code enforcement action on it. What other options do we have?
You certainly have the option to discuss revocation of the approved special use permit. That certainly is within your purview. However, we would like to have a further discussion or more in-depth discussion in terms of all of the conditions. I know that the applicant has been working with staff to work through all of those conditions. Remember that the objective was we're not able to restore the site to its pre-disturbed condition, unfortunately. However, the objective was to stabilize the site, to re-veg the site, to restore it to essentially to its pre-established condition as much as possible. And it also involved working with the with our partner agencies at the state and the federal level. And so there was a lot going on behind the scenes. And I know that it was initially anticipated that the applicant was going to return in the fall. We anticipated that because there was work that was still ongoing, that was just not possible to provide an update at that time, and that's why it's before you today. But we will bring it back for further discussion before this board.
Okay, that is not really a satisfactory answer for me, and I appreciate where you're coming from. So, Mr. Chair, I would ask that through the chair, we ask that this be an agendized item at our next meeting for action.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
If I may comment, this item is not on the agenda for action. While the commissioner can do it at the end under commissioner comments and commissioner requests, I think it'd be more appropriate at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Large, I appreciate that. I'll bring it back at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Toulouse. Ms. Olander, you just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. These are not directed at you. We would really prefer to have the applicant here to address some of these issues. You know, I echo the sentiment of Mr. Toulouse over here, because when I went through it, I mean, you know, there's no yellow willows and mountain alders and quaking aspens and the black cottonwood, which was all in the original documentation as to what was lined in that creek. In addition, it's Exhibit D, page 7 of 11. They gave us a diagram of what it's supposed to look like, and they talk about it having a canopy over the creek itself, and it doesn't appear that really any of that has taken place. But when we bring this back to the board, we'll get into more detail on that. Are there any more questions for Ms. Olander? Mr. Stanley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Planner Olander, I actually have two questions, one of which may go to Mr. Lloyd. The first is, could you tell us a little bit more about the SWIP requirement?
Julie Olander for the record. You know, I'm not totally familiar with NDEP's process and how I know they require SWIP. That was one of the first requirements they have. I'm not sure exactly how. I know it's being inspected weekly to make sure that there's water clarity and so forth. And so that's part of the SWIP. But for other specific details, that would be, you would have to ask some from it. We'd have to request to have NDEP come and speak to those items specifically.
All right, thank you. And the second question is, Mr. Lloyd, I had a slightly different view, although the outcome was, a view of the outcome is similar to what else has been stated here at the board. But at the time, I think we all realized that you were threading a certain needle here, jurisdictionally and so forth. And attendant to our next review of this, could we perhaps in advance, or certainly at the time, get some presentation about the jurisdictional pecking order, if you will, from federal, state, local, county agencies, partner agencies, I believe you would call them?
We can certainly include that as part of the presentation. I'm sorry, and through the chair, yes, Mr. Board Member, we can certainly include that discussion in terms of the pecking order and the responsibilities from the different jurisdictions. We can certainly invite those representatives from those agencies. Not certain that they will be able to make the meeting, but I think having somebody here would certainly be a benefit as well. So.
Mr. Stanley?
If I may follow up, are you saying that you can have someone give an overview, and you would also invite the various agencies to attend, or will we have holes in the presentation based on the jurisdiction of agencies who don't choose to appear?
And again, we don't want to speak for those agencies. So all that we can provide is better direction in terms of what their responsibilities are, what Washoe County's responsibilities are, and we can invite representatives, but there is no certainty that anybody will show up from those agencies.
Thank you. And I think that dividing line is probably the key piece, where we stop and they start. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions for Ms. Olander?
Well,
Hill?
I don't know if it's a question for Julie, but I went by there the first time in 2018, and looked at the property. Is that appropriate for us to visit the site and look at the conditions? I mean, it's not trespassing or anything, isn't it?
As long, Julie Olander for the record, as long you're staying on the street, I went there yesterday, and I just walked on the street and took photos from there, yes. There's, it's just you can't go
No,
on the
there's that
property.
little bridge that goes
Correct.
over, and
And
that's
that's
kind of
public right away. Yeah, it's
Okay.
an emergency exit, so.
Okay, great.
I just would ask questions, if there are specific conditions that you would like me to address, if you could make that clear when you make the motion to bring this back, so I have detailed, a little bit clearer idea of which ones are glaring to you, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Olander, again, my comments are not directed at you. I think that you all do an amazing job under very difficult circumstances, but I am very unhappy with the way this project is transpiring. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Ms. Olander? Thank you. We appreciate it. And I will just say it, I'll just state it for the record, but is the applicant or their representative present and wish to speak on this matter? As I thought. Thank you. Go ahead and do that. Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter?
We have no public comment.
Thank you. We'll bring it, I guess, back to the board for discussion.
We should save our staff reports, so.
I would definitely save your staff reports
Okay.
to be heard again. Let me just step in here. This has been an ongoing situation for quite some time, and I remember I looked over the timeline of some of these events that happened, and I was really actually surprised or disappointed that it appears that when this first came to the attention of, of code enforcement and to the planning division, that the gentleman blatantly disregarded the notices that were given to him. Just to read some of this is, the division conducted an inspection on April 9th, 2019, issued the property owner a verbal notification for the alleged violations. April 22nd, the division issued a work order for the permits. June 13th, division conducted a compliance inspection, issued the property owner a written notification for alleged violations. July 5th, 2019, the division received discharge report for working in water permits. Stated that the DMR narrative stated that on June 14th and June 26th, Thomas Creek was crossed with equipment. The narrative also stated during this time, work was also occurred on Thomas Creek proper. Property owner failed to submit the applications on September 14th, 2018. September 20th, the division visited the site and found the work continued to progress. September 25th, division visited the site to verify compliance with the cease and desist order. The water's permit had not been obtained. However, no additional construction activity was observed at that time. September 27th, 18, the property owner covering future construction at the work site. October 4th, they conducted a compliance inspection and issued the property owner a verbal notification of alleged violations again. November 19th, conducted a compliance investigation and issued the property owner a verbal notification of alleged violations, and on and on and on. It would appear to me that this individual really had no intention of complying with what was set forth either through regs or statute or anything else, and just blatantly continued to go down the path that he went until he got it to where he has it now. I echo the sentiment of Mr. Toulouse as to I'd like to hear from the applicant or have more answers to the questions that we have for the board members up here. That's kind of my take on it. Are there any other questions on this issue or any other further discussion? Mr. Stanley?
I have one question, and not sure if we have the answer to it here at the board or whether we need to ask Mr. Lloyd, but with the understanding that there was a noble attempt to work with the other agencies and that seems to have fallen dramatically short, who has the ball? Who has the lead responsibility? Is it ours to see that, for want of a better term, is it the counties to see that these issues are addressed? Or is it a federal agency? Who takes precedence here, I wonder?
We can go ahead and ask Mr. Lloyd about that, but I would appear that, we each have our lane that we're supposed to stay within. And there are evidently multiple lanes. This is about a 6 or 8 lane highway out there.
I was just wondering who had the lead lane.
Okay. Mr. Lloyd, could you help us out there?
Yes, and that's exactly the answer that I was going to offer, that, certainly Washoe County staff, we have the lane that we require the applicant to adhere to. For example, NDEP, they require a SWIP permit. We do not enforce that permit, but that is enforced by, through the state offices and that NDEP, and same with the Corps of Engineers. They have their own permitting requirements. So there's essentially 3 different parallel processes that are being followed at this time.
Mr. Stanley?
One last question. I don't know if there is in this case, but should there have, there might very likely be, if there were conflict between the degree of remediation, the various items, how is that resolved?
And I think that's a very good question through the chair. I don't know that we have a specific answer for you. There is a requirement that conditions be adhered to, that staff will follow up. We do require that the applicant obtain the necessary permits, and through a review of those permits, again, when you're looking at revegetation, you're not gonna see the results immediately. Oftentimes, it takes years for reveg to establish. And so the product, the end result, will not be known for quite some time. All that we can do is look at what's been filed on paper, on the plans, and then follow up in terms of, has that work been done out in the field? And so it's not an exact science. So we try our best to meet those standards as we see fit.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Okay, in closing this, I just want to take one more moment of time here, and I do want to thank Mr. Lloyd, to you and your staff, for the time frame that this has been occurring. You guys have done a wonderful job of attempting to get compliance and working with the various individuals involved in this, and we appreciate that. Our comments really are not directed in a negative manner, in any negative manner toward you or your staff. You guys have done an excellent job for us, so thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. We'll go ahead and close this item.
If I could, and kind of following up to the question that Ms. Olander asked, if we could get more specific in terms of which conditions identified as part of your Exhibit A that you wish staff to follow up on, so we can narrowly tailor that response, that would be very beneficial.
Mr. Lloyd, do we need to do that today, or can we get back to you?
If you could follow up with staff, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Just
Thank you.
email Julie our question?
Please do, yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and close that item. We'll move on. The next item on the agenda is special use permit case number WSUP 19-0023, DDC Enterprises. And before we start there, are there any disclosures?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Breznik, it's yours.
Chris Bronzik, Washoe County Planning. We are looking at WSUP 19-23. This is DDC Enterprises. The applicant's requesting a special use permit to operate a construction sales and services office, as well as have storage of operable vehicles. This is located within the Old Washoe City Historic District, within the South Valleys Area Plan. that area plan does require that this use type come in for a special use permit specifically. Additionally, the applicant is also requesting to legalize illegally graded, illegal grading on the subject property. I provided a vicinity map for you. They are located off of Old 395 South. The applicant did provide a landscape plan. The entire site is fenced off. To the south property line, as is indicated with this photo, that is going to be a storage garage for vehicles and equipment. To the north is an office where they will be, their primary hub will be. This is the as-built grading plan that they provided. The grading plan does meet Washoe County requirements. Again, though, it was illegally done, and this SUP does bring that into legal standing at this point. So the primary reason that this, the legal grading would have triggered an SUP is they did grade more than 1 acre on less than 6 acres and less than 15%. Part of that grading did construct V-ditches on the east and west property lines, specifically for drainage. Includes 6-to-1 slopes. And the total amount of grading for this property was estimated to be 1138 cubic yards of cut and 1511 cubic yards of fill, with 13 cubic yards of import. As mentioned, they are constructing an office, attached garage, and shop. They're anticipating 12 to 15 weekday peak hour trips. This was heard at the South Truckee Meadows Washoe Valley Cab on January 2nd. There were public concerns related to landscaping, hours of operations, and traffic numbers. This was unanimously recommended for approval. I provided a slide for the required findings for a special use permit. Its consistency, improvements, site suitability, issuance not detrimental, and effect on military installations. Staff is recommending approval with conditions, and I've provided a possible motion for you. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bronchick, when did the illegal grading occur?
So my understanding when talking to the applicants was sometime in 2018.
When?
2018.
Okay. So I'll make my feelings known yet again. We're here to retroactively fix something. And that there's got to be some sort of penalty or enforcement action or something on the retroactive stuff. I've made that point before, and it seems like we don't ever get anywhere with it. So that was my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, I do have a quick question for you. Is this only going to be vehicle storage, or is there going to be commercial sales on this site, or do you know?
I'm not fully in the know with that. The applicants are here, but they are going to be storing equipment and vehicles for their operations at this site. Their primary headquarters is out of Gardnerville, and a lot of the work that they do is up here in the Reno area, and this is acting as a secondary staging operation for them.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Stanley?
Thank you. Chris, given the problem with the grading, undocumented grading here a while back, 2018, are there any provisions that you would think might be appropriate, or they're in place now, for a follow-up to make sure that this one goes well?
So what they're doing right now, The illegal grading that they did was more or less to clear this site. The amounts would not have triggered a special use permit. And part of the development that they are going through with, landscaping would be exempt from the grading code. The paved area for maneuverability and turnaround and for vehicles would be exempt from grading. And anything where a structure would be on top would also be exempt from grading. When they submitted this, engineering and myself caught the grading rather quickly within our review. And we pushed this quite a number of months so they could provide us engineering drawings, updated grading calcs, as well as-built and previous grading plans associated with their project. So it wasn't something we just brushed under and ignored.
So is that a no further follow-up to be required answer, or nothing extraordinary in that regard?
Nothing extraordinary, however, we still do follow-ups for landscaping, and at that time, we'd go out there and also look at the grading, but.
And if I may follow up?
Yes.
And the landscaping that you mentioned there, was that to address the public concerns and so forth? And do you feel that the conditioning that you've done there offsets the community concerns?
So the landscaping requirements, they're required to have buffering. So adjacent to them is still general commercial. However, to the south, where you saw the larger buffer area, that is adjacent to residential zone property. It is vacant property at this point, but we'd still require significant landscaping buffers, which is what you see here. Additionally, the fencing that they do have has solid slats that are within it to increase opacity.
Thank you.
Mr. Toulouse?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bronchick, at what level of grading is a special use permit required?
So the reason that this was, the reason this would have triggered the SUP is because of the amount of grading. So at the time, it was a vacant parcel, and they graded 1.6 acres. So anything over 1 acre that is under 15% slope within six acres. I said that wrong, I'm sorry, but what they have done did trigger that SUP.
So I want to make sure that I understand. I thought I heard you say that they had illegally graded 1 acre.
They
And-
illegally,
And 1 acre triggers a special use permit, right?
yes, that is correct.
But then a couple of sentences later, you said that it would not have triggered a special use permit,
The amounts would not have triggered the SUP.
but the area would have triggered a special use permit, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Area triggered it, volumes did not.
right, okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you. Appreciate that. Is the applicant present and wish to speak on this issue? On this item, I should say.
Hi, I'm Doug Curtis with Curtis & Sons LLC. The illegal grading, it sounds worse than it was. What we did is we went in and some people dumped garbage there before we got it. There was a hump of some somebody had dumped some dirt from a dump truck, and all we did is went and knocked the weeds down, and then we went in to get the permit, and he says, oh, that's illegal grading. We didn't go in and, I mean, we weren't making huge cuts and grades and fills and things like that. Then we found out it was an illegal grading process, and we went through all the, the right channels from here on out to get everything done properly. I mean, we didn't cut the side of a mountain out or anything. We were just cleaning it up. So
Okay, thank you.
other than that, if any other questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, maybe you can answer the question that I asked earlier about, is this gonna be commercial sales on site, or is this just gonna be storage for your,
No, this will just be where we store equipment, and we'll have a little shop there that kind of stuff. We won't have commercial sales out of there at all.
I believe the size of the shop, going through the documentation, is gonna be about 40 by 60, is that
40 by
correct?
60, yep.
And is that a drive-in where it's more like a garage where you can store vehicles inside, or?
There will be, more than anything, we'll be storing materials such as reels of cable, pedestals, handholds, things like that. But yes, you can drive, there'll be 2 big bay doors you could drive a truck into, with a shop in the corner, with an office in the corner of the shop.
And for the record, would you tell us what your hours of operation plan on being?
Our normal hours of operation are 7 to 4 standard hours, and we don't normally work much on the weekends. Not to say that's gonna happen every single day, but that's our hours of operation.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any more questions for Mr. Curtis? Mr. Stanley?
Just a quick one, thank you. Is the grading that you did, is that sometimes just called a scrape? Just took off the sage?
Yeah.
Could you give us some idea of the blade depth?
The blade depth?
How much you
In most
cut?
places, we barely went 3-4 inches. We had to remove the mounds, which did make a considerable amount of material that was dumped there already. So they weren't, in other words, it wasn't virgin earth that we removed. It was stuff that was brought there, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions for this gentleman? Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter?
We have no public comment.
Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and close the public comment, bring it back to the board for discussion. Any discussion? Mr. Toulouse?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really don't have a lot of issues with the project. It fits the area, it follows the guidelines of the South Valley's area plan, other than the retroactive grading, which again is one of my bones that I like to pick at. Again, Mr. Lloyd, I would really like to see us at some point tackle that retroactive issue and see if we can fix it. And I know that that is a very difficult hurdle, but there's got to be something that we can do about retroactive violations, or making it legal after the fact. So that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Stanley?
Thank you. To address that, the concern that I think we all have about the retroactive do-overs, this one and some others we've run into have been a little different in that the errors were not purposeful, and hadn't, as opposed to some that we've mentioned earlier today where notices were given and disregarded and so forth. So I think that sets this a bit apart. The other thing is, when we get around to figuring out how these retroactive things would work, we might want to have those concepts in mind too, the ones that are willful and the ones that are accidental, and any differentiation we should make there.
Thank you, Mr. Stanley. Yes, I believe that topic alone could probably be discussed toward the end here, maybe future agenda items, or I should say requests for staff. So we can go ahead and address that in more detail if we need to. Other than that, are there any more questions or any more discussion on this topic?
No.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Go ahead, Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and information received during the public hearing, Washoe County Board of Adjustment, with the conditions, that's kind of written funny there, special use permit, case number WSUP 19-0023 for DDC Enterprises, having made all 5 findings in accordance with Washoe County Code Section 110.810.30, those being consistency, improvements, and site suitability, issuance not detrimental and no effect on a military installation. And just to clarify, I am moving for approval, which I think that this motion actually doesn't say, but I am moving for approval of this case.
Thank you. Is there a second? Mr. Stanley, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Motion passes unanimously.
That was a wonky.
Next on the agenda is special use case number WSUP 19-0028, Saving Grace Academy. Yes, sir, you are up.
Dan Colon for the record. Have before you WSUP 19-0028 for Saving Grace Academy. The applicant is requesting to establish a child daycare use type within a 30 by 52-foot area within the existing New Life Assembly of God Church. The applicant is also requesting to vary the landscaping and parking standards. And the parcel in question has a regulatory zone of medium-density suburban, which allows a child daycare use type with a special use permit. This facility will have a 49-child maximum capacity, 3 employees at peak shift, and as I said before, will be housed within the existing New Life Assembly of God building. Anticipated hours of operation are between 6:30 a.m. and 6 p.m. I've provided a vicinity map for you. This is just to the east on Lemon Drive. As you can see, in the southwestern corner, you have Swan Lake. Here's the site map. The orange dotted line outlines the approximate location of the daycare use type. And here are the traffic and parking numbers. There are going to be 49 total parking spaces available on site. Only 11 spaces are required, of which 2 must be for handicap parking. And the applicant anticipates no more than 49 automobiles at any one time, which is below the threshold for a traffic report. Applicant is requesting to not have to bring the site up to current parking and landscaping standards. Currently, the existing parking and landscaping is a legal non-conforming state. Per Washoe County Code 110.412.50 subsection E and interpretation 04-01, the applicant is not required to update a current legal non-conforming development's parking and landscaping. Therefore, staff supports the varied standard that the applicant is requesting. Notice was sent to 33 affected property owners, 1,800 feet from the site. And the application was presented to the North Valleys CAB on January 13th of 2020. There they discussed traffic impacts on Lemon Drive, adequate existing parking for the proposed use, provided comments on the adequacy of the existing playground. Generally, citizens supported the daycare. Therefore, North Valleys CAB voted unanimously to recommend the approval of the proposed child daycare use. So staff is able to make all 5 of the special use permit findings: consistency, improvements, site suitability, issuance not detrimental, and effect on a military installation. And therefore, staff is recommending that the board approve the requested special use permit with the conditions attached. And I have provided a motion for you, for your convenience, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Mr. Stanley?
Thank you. This is one confirming question, I think. Did I understand you to say that the code expected 11 minimum parking places with 2 for handicapped, and the applicant is providing 49?
That is correct. It is currently an existing church, so they're utilizing the church's much larger parking capacity.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And, thank you. And there'll be 3 staff on site at all times? Is that what they're proposing? Or maybe I should ask the applicant that. You can go ahead and hold
I
off.
believe that is for peak employees. I can't speak to what the number of staff on at all times. That would be better directed towards the applicant.
Okay, I'll do that. Just one other thing, this is just a side note. You had a slide up there in which you said that I guess the parking was legally non-conforming. Is that correct?
Yes, legal non-conforming.
Just interesting play on words, that it's legal, but it's non-conforming.
So this means that it was approved prior to the current code, and therefore it does not meet current standards, but it was legal when it was.
Legal when it was.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Madam Secretary, is the applicant present wishing to speak on this matter?
Yes.
Yes, apparently so.
Good afternoon. I'm Sue Walcott-Witten with Saving Grace Academy.
Okay. Just quick, you're going to have 3 staff at all times, or just,
It goes according to how many, the children ratio. So there's 13 children to 1 in the staff. You have to have at least 2 on at all times. But during peak hours, we would have 3, which is in the morning when they drop off and in the evening when they pick up.
okay. And this is the facility is going to be a 30 by 52 square foot area, right? Is that correct?
Yes, that includes the kitchen and the restrooms.
That includes kitchen and restroom?
Yes.
Okay. And so if you take that of 49 children and you add in your 3 staff, that's about, well, actually a little bit less than 30 square feet per child, a 5 foot by 6 foot area in that.
It's, well, 49, I was told when I was doing this by childcare licensing that I would want to put the maximum amount of kids that I would want, not necessarily for that particular site, because after 49, if you go 50 and more, then it's a different type of license.
So are you actually planning to have 49 children, or you
No,
just
that
wanted
won't
to stay
accommodate,
below that?
I'm sorry. No, that won't accommodate 49. It's 34 and a half square feet per child.
Yeah, I didn't think so, so, okay, thank you, I'm satisfied
welcome.
with that. Any other questions? Mr. Stanley?
Hi.
Hi.
Along those same lines, was the reason for this, was it driven by the community saying, hey, this would be a great thing to have, or how are you estimating the number of children you might be working with?
Well, I did a lot of research, and in that area, there are no licensed childcare facilities at the time when I started this, and that 70% of our children that start kindergarten haven't been to preschool. So in the North Valleys area, it's desperately needed.
Okay, and a follow-up, if you don't mind.
Please.
So what do you anticipate for, let's say, I don't want to call it average daily attendance, but how many kids do you expect to have within the first year, would you say?
Well, I would hope to have at least 30.
30 or so?
But I did a Facebook kind of questionnaire for interested people, and I had 39 families.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. When you leave, would you please fill out one of those forms just for our secretary so we can have that, so we know who we were talking to?
Certainly.
Thank you kindly, I appreciate that. Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item?
We have no public comment.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and close public comment, bring it back to the board for discussion. Any discussion?
Sounds like a good thing.
With that, then, I will go ahead and accept a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Ms. Hill,
I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and the information received during the public hearing, the Washoe County Board of Adjustment approved with conditions special use permit case number WSUP 19-0028 for Saving Grace Academy, having made all 5 findings in accordance with Washoe County Code Section 110.810.30, including consistency, improvements, site suitability, issuance not detrimental, and effects on a military installation.
thank you. Second, Mr. Stanley seconds it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Next agenda item is administrative permit case number WADMIN 19-0022, Lullaby Nursery. Mr. Pelham.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Roger Pelham with Washoe County Planning. This administrative permit is a request to allow a child daycare facility for up to 15 children within an existing commercial building in the Cold Springs area. The arrow here indicates that building, and it'll essentially be that south portion of the building. This is its location in relationship to Cold Springs Drive, and if you went further south, you would then hit 395. But again, here it's in the middle of Woodland Village, or sometimes called Cold Springs 2000. Again, here is that building, and what I would note on the site plan is that you have existing parking already paved and in place. There is existing mature landscaping surrounding it. Conditions of approval have been provided by the relevant agencies, including those to bring the interior of that commercial building up to code for this particular use type, which, as you might suspect, is a little bit more stringent than it would be for some other use types. Approximately 136 property owners were noticed. This was reviewed by the North Valley Citizen Advisory Board in January, who did recommend approval. Again, all relevant agencies were notified. Their recommended conditions have been included. I'd like to address briefly each of the legal findings of fact. It is certainly consistent. There are no policies or action programs in the North Valley's area plan that would prohibit a child daycare. Improvements, well, again, this is essentially an existing facility, so it's there. The site is suitable, again, within a commercial area in the midst of an otherwise residential area. This zoning is neighborhood commercial, so this really is the type of thing that is intended for this area. Issuance not detrimental. It's, several hundred feet to the nearest dwelling unit from here, and there is no military installation in the vicinity. With that, I hope I've not been too brief, but I believe the findings can be made, and I am recommending approval subject to the conditions of approval as included in your staff report. With that, I'm available for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Pelham. Let me step in here real quick. I have to apologize to the board. I did not ask for any disclosures at the beginning of this. Are there any disclosures? None. Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Pelham then? No. Mr. Pelham, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Is the applicant present, and do they wish to speak on this matter?
Hello, my name is Katarina Jackson. I'm the owner of Lullaby Nursery LLC, and I will also be the acting director once the facility does open, with all of your permission. I'm really here to just answer any questions that you may have for me. As he was saying, the structure is already built. I'm not proposing any construction whatsoever. There will be no changes to the landscaping, so I'm really just utilizing the space within the commercial building.
Thank you. Ms. Hill?
Can you tell us what other commercial uses are in that building?
So there are two other tenants in the property. There's Woodsong Herbs, which is a, as I understand it, a just herb preparing for cooking purposes. They're a commercial space as well. And there's also the Village Grill, which is a neighborhood restaurant.
Which is what?
A neighborhood restaurant.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Quick question for you. How many staff do you plan on having?
I plan on having 3 to 4, maintaining the 1-to-4 ratio.
And how are you going to address the issue of food for the children? How is
So
that?
I actually will not be preparing food for the children. It will all be brought by the parents because I do not have a commercial kitchen space.
Thank you. Mr. Stanley?
Thank you. I understand, thank you. I understand that you're setting up for 15 kids. Do you anticipate starting with 15 or?
So I do have a wait list of 13 right now. I would prefer to stay closer to 12 just because I feel that a lower ratio would be better for the children.
All right, thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you. Madam Secretary, is anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter?
We have no public comment.
Thank you. We'll close the public comment, bring it back to the board for discussion. Is there any discussion?
Sounds like a great project.
Thank you, Mr. Stanley. I concur. With that, I will accept a motion. Mr. Stanley?
Thank you. I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and information received during the public hearing, the Board of Adjustment approve administrative permit case number WAD-MIN 19-0022 for Lullaby Nursery LLC, having made all the 5 findings in accordance with Washoe County Development Code Section 110.808.25, including consistency improvements, site suitability, issuance not detrimental, and effect on a military installation.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Luce seconds it. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Next up is variance case number WPVAR 19-0002, Ganawabi Properties LLC. Before we get started, are there any disclosures? None? Thank you. Mr. Pelham.
Good afternoon again, Mr. Chairman. Again, members of the board, Roger Pelham with Washoe County Planning. This is a variance request to reduce the front yard setback on a residential property off Ganawabi up in Crystal Bay. Here we go. Request is to reduce the required front yard from 20 feet to 6.6 feet, and would like to note that because of the slope of the property, there's actually a built-in variance in the Washoe County Code, so theoretically this could have been developed at 15 feet from the front yard setback with no approvals, no additional approval, I should say. This is a vicinity map. There to the right where it says Lake Tahoe is in fact the water, and then Ganawabi is there uphill on the left. This is the proposed site plan. The dwelling proposed is there in blue. The closest point of the front yard property line to the dwelling is indicated there with this red arrow. That's where the 6.6 feet would be measured from. Obviously, going out both ways from that point, it's a little bit longer. This is an overhead photo of the subject site, again going from up on Ganawabi down to the shore, which is essentially going east. North is up on this photo. Variances have a very high legal standard, as you're very well aware. Exceptional narrowness, shallowness, or shape of the specific piece of property by reason of exceptional topographic conditions or other extraordinary and exceptional situation or condition. Those are what we need to find for a variance to be granted. In this particular case, that's NRS. It comes into our code almost verbatim. This is at 110.804.25. And if we can make the special circumstance finding, then we also have some other findings to make. No detriment, no special privileges, use authorized, and again, effect on military installation. In this case, the parcel is exceptionally narrow. It's approximately 62 feet in width. The minimum width for the medium-density suburban zone is 80 feet. You have received a letter from opponents to this saying that there is a boundary line adjustment having been submitted that would then widen it, and this would no longer be the case. I can't speculate on that. That hasn't been submitted to Washoe County, has not been reviewed by Washoe County Planning. That is speculation at this point. The existing condition is a 62-foot width lot. Exceptional shape. The front property line, as was shown on the site plan, is 2 line segments that form a V, sort of pointing towards the lake. This is a unique situation. Essentially, none of the other parcels on Ganawabi have a V sort of pointing in that widens the right-of-way, okay? That's an exceptional shape and certainly is, again, another reason that the finding for exceptional circumstances can be made. Exceptional topographic conditions, like many in that area, a 33% slope is considered to be exceptional. Under the regional plan, anything between 0 and 15% is considered unconstrained. Anything between 15 and 30 is considered managed. Anything above 30% is considered constrained. That does not mean that every parcel of land with a steep slope automatically gets a variance. But the 3 combinations of factors, exceptional narrowness, exceptional shape, and exceptional topographic conditions, certainly create a physical hardship on the property that has led me to a recommendation of approval of this variance. Notice was sent to 52 affected property owners, and actually on this map, this shows the shape of most of those adjacent parcels. And I would note that with the subject site outlined there in the darker blue color, again, that front yard, the front property line being the V-shaped, as you can see here, is pretty unusual. The Incline Village Cab did consider this on January 6th. No vote was taken, but recommendations were made. Those have been provided to you. Those that were received by staff before the staff report was required to be finalized were included in the staff report. Others have been provided you prior to this hearing. This was sent to many agencies for review. All conditions of approval that have been recommended by the reviewing agencies have been included with the conditions of approval should this board grant approval. So, special circumstances. The slope is exceptional. The parcel is narrow. It is exceptionally shaped. One of the letters said that staff had sort of substituted a standard that more efficient location of a garage is a hardship. That is not what this says. This allows for a safer, it allows for a more efficient location for that garage. The hardship is the slope, the shape, and the narrowness. No substantial detriment. This is actually very much in character with the surrounding area. You're all probably familiar with Ganawabi, but here in a minute we're going to be looking at some photos. From the edge of the traveled way to the front of this garage, about 40 feet. Many of the garages on Ganawabi are a few feet, a handful of feet from the traveled way, and we will see that in a moment. Again, there are no special privileges, again, because this is consistent with the surrounding area. The use, the garage, the portion of the dwelling that would be closest, is not only allowed under the development code, but in fact is required with any new single-family dwelling. And again, there is no military installation nearby. This is an overhead photo showing the configuration of the right-of-way and the configuration of the adjacent parcels of land. So the subject parcel is there towards the center of the photo on the right, again with the sort of V-shaped front property line. You can see there to the south and as well as to the northwest other dwellings that are very close, or one even appears to be over the front property line. This is from the Washoe County GIS application. This is not a survey. There is certainly some wiggle room, but I think it's a very good tool from which we can see that the request is certainly within the character of the adjacent development. Again, overhead photo showing development of a number of garages there, again, very close to the traveled way of Ganawabi. This is a photo of the subject site looking north along Ganawabi. There you have one dwelling to the left. The development parcel would be just about where that blue SUV is parked in this photo. This is actually just from Google Earth. But it would be down and to the right where this dwelling is proposed to be located. Again, this is another garage, again, very close to the traveled way, and more very close to the traveled way, and more very close to the traveled way, and as you go further north, more close to the traveled way. Again, this is very much in character and consistent with the surrounding area. With that, staff can make the findings of hardship and am recommending approval subject to conditions of approval that have been provided in your staff report. With that, I am happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Pelham. Other questions? Ms. Hill?
Roger, did you request that there could be an alternative design that would not require a variance regardless of the exceptional characteristics of the site?
Thank you for the question. And that's something that's really, really important to be well understood. We don't have that luxury.
Well,
We as
you've done that
staff,
to me before.
we as staff only look at what is submitted. When something is submitted, we evaluate it based on its own merits. We don't have the luxury of saying, I would prefer to see something configured this way or prefer to see something configured another way. If there is an obvious way to configure something that does not require a variance, that's often our advice, because variances, again, have a very high legal standard. But no, we don't have the luxury to ask them to go back and reconfigure.
But you can determine that it is possible to build a dwelling unit on that property and meet the front yard setback.
Not really. What I would say is we have the ability to look for possible options, but I am not a design professional.
Okay. I know where you're coming from now.
Yeah. And I apologize.
No.
Mr. Chairman, if I stepped on your words.
No, I think you covered it, you explained it.
Absolutely.
Mr. Pelham, although there'll be a garage in which the vehicles can be parked, is there sufficient distance for off-site parking for guests that may show up? I understand you have a garage and you get 2 cars in there, or 1 car, whatever it is, but usually if the garages are full, whether it be vehicles or used as storage or something like that, if friends show up or something like that, is there adequate parking without creating hazards for the thoroughfare there?
This topic really has been the crux of virtually all of the conversation surrounding this variance request. And I would really address it in 2 different ways. First, I would say that's not a requirement of code. The requirement of code is you have 1 enclosed parking space and at least 1 additional off-street parking space. They're doing that with 2 enclosed parking spaces. So that's the one way I would sort of address it. The other way I would address it is that this particular area where that little V in the right-of-way is, as kind of pointing east, is an area that people utilize for off-street parking. Or I should say parking off the right-of-way, off the traveled way, would probably be a better way to say that. Will some of that be left? Yes. None of that is going away, but it is in front of this property owner's parcel, and his driveway will be constructed directly from that existing area that folks have used for parking off of the traveled way.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Roger, could you go back to your parcel map for me? Right there, thank you. So, Roger, help me understand. When I look at this map, the only portion of this parcel that to me is oddly shaped is that very front portion that abuts the road. So the rest of the parcel to me looks like it's pretty much in line with all the other parcels up there. There's a few narrower, there's a few wider, there's a few that have an even more odd shape. So would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Certainly.
Mr. Stanley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Roger, will there be on parking and on sight lines and on boundary line adjustments? This will kind of be the 3. On parking, will there be any different signage that'll be required saying no parking in front of my driveway, please? Or how much reduction of off-site, off-travel way parking will there be, do you reckon?
I'm speculating at a certain level here, but the driveway is 2 cars in width, so I would say approximately 2 cars.
And will there be signage required?
No.
Or
No
is it just so obvious that?
Yeah, no additional signage is required. Again, this is public right-of-way. And if there's room, you can park on the edge of a public right-of-way.
And would you consider that a detriment?
No.
Sightlines, there were some concerns in the letters here about sightlines to the lake and so forth from other property and property owners and other residences. Did you address that?
No, I did not. That is not a consideration for this variance. That is outside of our area of purview completely.
Okay, good. Coming back to both of those, are there any, is there any conditioning that, assuming there were any detriments, that would help ameliorate those potential detriments?
No, there really isn't. That is, and the reason for that is the fact that that's completely subjective. A person's view, some people might want to look at a very nice house, some people might prefer to look at trees. That is really outside of our review. Our review is whether there's really the special circumstances applicable to this parcel, and that is the limitation of my evaluation.
Okay, I think some people might argue that no detriment might be somewhat personal as well, but, and subjective. And the last question is on the boundary line adjustment. Do I understand the argument here being we are ignorant of we're unaware, better choice probably of words, of a boundary line adjustment procedure. Therefore, we're within the 4 points of the paper.
I would be absolutely uncomfortable speculating what might happen at some indeterminate point in the future.
Okay.
All we can evaluate is the condition as it exists today.
Gotcha. But if I were to ask a follow-up question and say, is the approval or denial for that matter, but the approval of this variance, what impact would that typically have on something like a boundary line readjustment? Or is that, again, one of those speculative kind of things in which you would not like to indulge?
I simply couldn't speculate. For example, if all they were doing was moving a line sideways north in this case, well, maybe that would have an effect, but maybe they were actually doing it a diagonal, and the center could be even, the frontage, I should say, could be even narrower, or maybe they're tilting it the other way. I just can't speculate.
Just unknown. All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Roger, question. So if, let's say that the structure was pushed down slope, the 13 and a half feet that is being proposed to be removed from the setback, okay? If it were pushed back that 13 and a half feet, we would still lose the same 2 off-street parking spaces because of the driveway, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Mr. Pelham, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Is the applicant present and wish to speak on this? Please come up to the podium.
Good afternoon, Board of Adjustment members. My name is Nick Exline. I work with Midkiff & Associates. Midkiff & Associates is a planning consulting firm up in Tahoe. I've got to meet most of you before, so thank you so much. I hope to be really brief with you today. I think Roger did an excellent job kind of covering the proposed variance. I just want to touch on a few different things and kind of provide some insight into what the design team was thinking and some of the considerations that we did include into our design that I think will answer some of your questions that you posed earlier. So essentially, I'm just showing these. These are just, screenshots of images you have in your staff report. And really, I'm just being somewhat redundant, but just to represent these plans, that these are plans and the design is very typical for Incline Village, Crystal Bay, specifically on littoral properties, where obviously the property value is expensive. People are looking to maximize space, maximize views, all these different things that you might anticipate. But we do have a lot of challenges with the site. It's very problematic to develop on, as are many of the parcels in Ganawabi. As Roger referenced, we have the exceptional narrowness and the exceptional shape. And I really want to highlight the exceptional shape is a very problematic challenge. Because when you factor in a lot of the other code considerations that don't typically go in front of this body, TRPA regulatory restrictions and so on and so forth, that V-shaped pie slice piece and the requirements as to how far that pushes us away from Ganawabi as it relates to grade poses all kinds of challenge. Then you couple that with the exceptional topography of the site, that being slope. Again, that further complicates our ability to be able to develop the slope in a manner that would be enjoyable for the property owners. And so again, here are just some photos of the site. And I think one of the photos that you get to in just 1 second, I think is the most illustrative. And that is looking essentially from the shoreline going back to the water or going back to Ganawabi. And with that, in this photo as well, you really get to see and get an experience the flavor of the slope and what we're dealing with. So you could imagine, wanting to, in theory, the idea of pushing this further down the hillside is an excellent idea. You start to talk to TRP regulators, the disturbance on the hillside, pushing it further into seating corridors. It becomes a more problematic exercise as you really start to develop those ideas, because these things were considered. And so, I know each variance is looked unto itself, but I do want to give a little history of variances on Ganawabi. I'm very proud to say that when, as a grad student at the University of Nevada in planning, I worked here in the planning department in Washoe County and spoke at this podium in the county's role for variances. And the first time I spoke in front of the Board of Adjustment happened to be for a variance on Ganawabi, because Ganawabi is a very challenging site. I dare guess that you're not going to find many other roads in Crystal Bay, Incline Village, or anywhere else within the county's purview that would have so many variances located on such a small space. And really, that's because everyone's dealing with the same situations, primarily slope, narrowness. I think it's also very interesting to note that, and Roger's photos captured this, that the neighbors directly to the south received a variance previously, and directly across the street received a variance. And so some of the issues we were looking to address through our design process were really exacerbated by those previous variances. So the house across the street bringing the residents directly onto the road, that pushed it closer to us. So we had to be more mindful of our roof ridge as it relates to that gentleman's view corridor. Again, to the neighbor to the south, the same situation played itself over again, because we were very concerned, in particular, I was very concerned of that individual's view corridor. But when you push the property directly abutting that property boundary, 1 foot of separation, that further exacerbates the problem. That, along with the parking, puts us in a situation and we're looking to address issues that were not brought about by our efforts, but we're being expected to solve them. And we really have worked to try to achieve that and to remove as many concerns as possible. So again, here's the home across the street is on your right. The home to the south is on your left. I think one of the important distinctions, and a lot of Roger's photos demonstrated this as well, and the house to the right is a perfect example of this, is that our house, or proposed residence, I should say, is going to be providing both the required parking per Washoe County Code, but additional parking on the road. And so we're going to be handling our parking situation as was designed by code, and as every project that is before you is expected to do. And so we've met that threshold, and we feel very comfortable with our parking relationship as it exists on site. But as I said, what we're required to look at and what I think we should be looking at are different things, especially people's views are very, very important to me. I was fortunate enough to buy a house in South Lake Tahoe in 2008, not on the lake. But I know what a special place it is and what a special place it is for the neighbors that are here today. And so views were very, very concerning to me. And so as we look towards the height processes and what we could do as various different options within both the county and TRPA regulatory environments, we developed a height process with the goal of ensuring that the top ridge of the garage would not sit above the gentleman across the street's existing view corridor. And so what we've attempted to do with this exhibit is show you that from Ganawabi grade to the top roof pitch of the proposed garage is 18 feet. This red dashed line is at 18 feet because our goal was to be able to develop a residence so that the person across the street could sit on their deck still and enjoy the views of the lake that still exist, that they currently enjoy. Similar to the south, and this isn't a perfect exhibit, and I'll tell you why, because it wouldn't be like for like as you move things down the slope. But again, what we were looking to do with pushing the residents further up towards Ganawabi is a benefit to the neighbor to the south. And so what I've attempted to do with this, relatively crude exhibit is just show that, is the red line remains constant. The one onto the image on the right is pushing the residents further down the hillside. So if you enjoy your view towards Diamond Peak into Incline Village, that would be precluded the further we push it down the hillside. So we're really stuck with a host of different things we need to consider as we're working to develop. And so pushing it up the hillside may be better for the neighbor to the south, but certainly going to be worse for the neighbor across the street because that would require us to increase our elevation at that point. And so as we're juggling, our regulatory requirements from multiple bodies, our scenic requirements, and plus the kind of the competing interests of the neighbors, what we wanted to come forward with is something that we, in good faith, could stand in from a body and say, we've looked at these people's concerns and we've actually considered them. No one's ever going to be happy, but we've put genuine effort to make sure that we were not going to impact someone negatively from this project. And again, just to touch on this as well, we're 40 to 50 to 70 feet, depending on which corner you're looking at from Ganawabi. As was stated earlier, most of the residences on Ganawabi are right on the road. So we have a much larger spacing between our proposed residence in Ganawabi that is enjoyed by, I would say, the existing residences on the road. And so this really comes back to, as we work to address community concerns, there's always going to be pushback, especially in Incline if history is any guide. And so, what are we going to be relying on? We have to rely on the code. We have to rely on the interpretation of staff. In particular, we have to be very, very, very conscious of fire. I think this is an extremely important part. I think living in Tahoe, if the campfire taught us anything, is that fire is a very real threat. And so, again, with this design, we were very conscious of fire, ensuring we did not impact any fire zones, fire access, anything that would be a detriment to community safety. And so we were engaged with the fire department and all those entities to ensure nothing we would be doing would be a hindrance to community safety. And you can see through the comments represented above and within your staff report that they agreed that they did not see our proposed project to be a detriment to community safety, to fire safety, and those other elements. And so with that, I'm really just going to open it up to questions, but I want to leave just that final thought, is that in this challenging metric, it's often very easy to say, like, oh, you could move this, you could change this, you could do this. But fundamentally, the problem is you're dealing with a lot of people with competing interests. And as I really attempted to obtain comments and suggestions and what could I possibly do to make this better for you, those suggestions were not forthcoming. And so in light of that, we did our absolute best job to take in both the requirements from the code and real-world requirements from people living in such a beautiful place and propose a development that would work in kind with that. And with that, I thank you so much for your time, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Exline. Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Exline, what's to stop you from pushing it down the hill, downslope, that 13.5 feet? So is it just that sight line that you're referring to? What's the engineering problem? What's the big obstacle of pushing it downslope?
It's height issues, it's sightline issues, it's also slope of driveway concerns, it's coverage realities. There's a whole host of different things. scenic implications as it relates to TRPA in particular. The further you push it down the hillside, we wanted to take advantage of existing vegetation, trees, so on and so forth, to screen the residents because, whereas, the immediate concerns for scenic are, of course, the neighbors and the community, but we all enjoy the lake. And so that's a very real concern as well from a scenic standpoint. And so we designed the residents to ensure we could utilize existing vegetation to screen the residents, which is also required by the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency.
So you're telling me that if you pushed it downslope, there would not be screening vegetation? Or there would be, or what?
So what we look to do is kind of working back, if you will, is look towards, and I would recommend this for all lakefront properties actually, especially with large growth pine, is you want to start to look to where vegetation is, specifically as it relates, and I don't have this with me today, I apologize, from the view corridor that TRPA will be reviewing this project from. And so really how a scenic review process works with TRPA, and Ms. Hill can speak to this as well, is they select a view angle, and then based on that, you show that view angle. The existing vegetation that's in front of the residence counts as a screening mechanism, and essentially it's just a juggling act based on your facade square footage, meets how much visible facade you're screening, if your project's permittable or not. And so it was really a function of that.
Okay, so do you know what that view angle that TRPA is going to use?
Yes, it's geez, what would be the best way to describe it? We were going southerly on the boat, so it would be, I guess, a northern view aspect. I actually think this photo wouldn't be that bad. Yeah. So we were looking to take, no, it's further around the corner because you can see that big pine. But this is the best photo I have today. And so wrapping around, and so really it's that in a combination. And I would also say that we want to minimize disturbance on site as well, especially on steep slopes. Again, it's not as simple as just pushing it down slight because now all of a sudden our grading volumes are going to be increased as we cut back further into the slope and so on and so forth, which could have pushed us in the volumes to get additional permits from Washoe County, just purely based on grading volumes as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Actually, I do have a couple. I guess a couple things I have is the view corridor that we've been talking about, and maybe I don't want to put Mr. Large on the spot, but nobody is guaranteed from their property a view corridor from another property, unless basically it's been signed off and recorded and everything else. So if I build a house up anywhere in the hills and I've got this beautiful view out in front of me, but the lot below me, someone decides to go up there and put something on there, I have no right to say, you can't do that because you're within, your legal rights to go ahead and do that. So the view corridor issue that I see you're presenting, I give you credit that you're taking that into consideration for the neighbors, but it's really not a determining factor as to you can't do it if in fact you were to push the property line back. The second thing is with the fire safety issues, and I am not a fireman, but a concern I've always had with all these that have been approved and the variances that happen up there is, you start reducing setback distances from side yards, and, we always talk about defensible space, and yet you go up there into Lake Tahoe, and there's areas I can jump from roof to roof and never touch the ground, and yet that's been approved. So I'm not too sure that fire safety is an issue there, especially the way they keep cramming things in there. My question for you is, there's no house on the property now. Granted, there is, there's steepness and narrowness in the shape of the lot and all that. But one of the issues is to create, if it creates a hardship for the individuals. And I guess my question to you is, if there's no house on the lot now, then how does this create a hardship? Because there are remedies, if you want to call that. You know, you can make the house smaller, you can push the house back. So where is the hardship lie when you've decided that this is the size house that you want, and that encroaches basically onto, over the, you know, into a variance issue? Help me understand why that creates a hardship.
Well, I mean,
when there's nothing on the
I guess I
property.
would kind of change that question to some degree in that by that rationale, no hardship could conceivably exist because in theory, I could come with some mitigating factor in which you could develop on any parcel pretty close. For instance, I could come up with realities for the neighbor directly to the south and directly across the street in which they could have developed their property without using a variance. But I'm assuming they use the variance for the same reason we did, because it's much more complicated than that. For example, the individual across the street, I referenced, what would it be much more disturbing to cut further into the hillside? I'm assuming similar thinking went into the design of that residence. And so simply the idea that you could put it in a very small box and in theory would work does, to some degree, take away from the enjoyment of the property. And we're dealing with a very confined, complex parcel as it relates to topography, design, and whatnot. Yeah, please do. No, sorry, this is the project designer, Claire Walton.
Okay,
If I can, I just wanted to speak to hardship.
just go ahead and state your name for the record.
My name is Claire Walton. I'm the designer of the project. So essentially, I just wanted to speak to the hardship component. When the house is slid further down the hill, and really just the garage structure, there's a height requirement that means that first piece of the building that's closest to the road has to be 28 feet from grade. It's kind of measured differently in the segmented height approach. So that pushes that, as the further we get down grade with that 33% slope, the garage piece also scoots down, but Ganawabi Road stays the same. So we're dealing then with a steeper slope driveway, plus grade falls away, and so that driveway is really elevated out of the ground, so it's essentially a bridge structure. So the further away, it's not like it's married to the ground in any way, it's fully elevated in the air. So the further the garage structure is pushed away from the road, the longer the driveway bridge is, the steeper down it is, and the further out of the grade. So it becomes, like, it feels unsafe to use. I don't know, like unsafe, but it would be challenging to use. It looks, visually like it doesn't fit in with the other neighbors, because the other neighbors are all actually very close to the road and don't really have these bridges. So I think all the other things that Nick has said are correct, but I just wanted to add in the piece about the driveway structure being a bridge and the steepness of the slope.
I guess to clarify a point that you made about, well, no variances to be made or no hardship issues, I would counter that this board has heard situations in which variances right off the bat are appropriate. We've had individuals that are no longer as mobile as they used to be on a multi-story house and have to add a room into a living quarters, and that, without a doubt, is a hardship.
Right.
My question is, right now, is that there's nothing on the property other than you want to put this house on and you basically want to take up 9 feet of a variance.
Right.
Because if you didn't take the 9 feet of the variance, you wouldn't be here before us today. You'd be building the house on that property well within the means that you can do so. So that's kind of where I was coming from.
Right, no, definitely. And I think it's clears onto a whole host of just other issues. It's to some degree the ability for a property owner to be able to enjoy their property meets the requirements and stipulations by the regulatory bodies that have authority to permit projects on the shoreline of Tahoe, which are numerous, and it's a very arduous process. And so it's not something they hand out willy-nilly to get the permits and to be able to develop on a lot like this.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Michael Large for the record, for the District Attorney's Office. The hardship in question here by code is not to the individual owner, it's to the property itself. So in terms of your analogy in regard to somebody who has to live on the single floor, it goes with the property, not with the individual owner.
Thank you, Mr. Large, but I guess my question to you is the property is the property is the property. There is no hardship to a property other than it's a piece of property. The hardship becomes the issue when the owner wants to do something to the property that would affect him. Is that a true statement then, or? Help me clarify that, where you say it's the property, but a piece of land sitting there is just sitting there.
Well,
It doesn't become a hardship until an individual decides to do something with the property.
that is correct. When we are looking at the determination of a hardship, we are looking at the physical constraints of the property, not the physical constraints of the person that's dwelling in that property. So we look at developability, we look at steepness, slope, shape, all of those factors that Mr. Pelham identified in his presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Pelham, did you want to add to that?
No, thank you. I believe the planning manager really said what I was going to, is state law really lays it out very clearly for us. Narrowness, shallowness, shape, topography. That's the limit of our evaluation. That's the limit of my evaluation on this one. Those factors.
Ms. Hill?
Well, let's look at the narrowness. Are they getting a variance for a side yard setback?
They are not. This is simply to reduce.
So that's kind of a moot point that it's narrow. They're not asking for any variance for the side yard.
I would tend to disagree with that. That is one of the factors that goes into the design of the dwelling itself. One constraint. It is possible that if it were wider, they might have come up with a different type of configuration. Again, that's speculating, and I really don't want to go into speculation, but what we do know is that state law has told us that exceptional narrowness is one of the special circumstances.
Gotcha.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Toulouse?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Roger, this is why I had you bring up the parcel map for me.
Certainly.
So it says exceptional narrowness, exceptional topographic conditions. When we're dealing with Gonawabi Road, it's really not exceptional, because when you look at this parcel map, most of what I see on the parcel map are approximately the same width. You know, some are wider, some are narrower. Some have a more unusual shape, and some don't have a more unusual shape. So when I guess I'm talking terms here.
Yes.
When we say exceptional narrowness, what does that mean? Does that mean your interpretation of exceptional narrowness, or the board's interpretation, or is there something more finite?
Thank you for that question. And I'm actually looking over at my planning manager here for a moment, because he and I have had any number of spirited discussions over the last couple of decades on this very topic. It is an objective standard. And that objective standard is the minimum requirements for a parcel within that regulatory zone.
Okay.
So within the medium-density suburban regulatory zone, if you were developing a parcel today, the minimum lot width is 80. You can't create one less than that. We wouldn't approve the final map that created the lot, okay? We have those minimum dimensions of 80 feet in width. We have a minimum area of 12,000 square feet. It could be less if it were a common open space development, but it is an objective standard based upon the regulatory zone. Likewise, the slope is an objective standard based upon, in this particular case, 30% slopes. Above 30% is constrained.
Right.
So it's objective. It is not subject to my opinion.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Any other questions for Mr. Pelham? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Let's go back to, were there any other additional questions wish to be asked to the applicant or the representative? Can we have, would you?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stanley.
This will be a quick one. The question of boundary line readjustment, can you shed any light on that, historically speaking?
Yeah, so we certainly are contemplating a boundary line adjustment. There's realities that are unknown right now, whether that will be completed or not. But it has been contemplated, certainly, yes.
Thank you. Any detail in terms of what you're contemplating?
Oh, very minor. You're talking a few feet. It would still, per Roger's statements, would adhere to it would be, the narrowness would still be narrower than medium density suburban exists now. So any boundary line adjustment that would be completed with TRPA and with Washoe County. TRPA, actually, we are pursuing a boundary line adjustment, and it would not, in my belief, be wider than that, which would change Roger's findings.
Right, and I think that was 60 versus 80 or something, if I remember correctly. So 20 feet, give or,
right,
and change. So if you're working with TRPA already, what's being contemplated there?
No, it's a very, very minor alterations. We're not doing dramatic
Which would
changes.
be about how big?
Sorry, I don't have the number, apologize, right on the top of my head, but we have someone in the audience that does, so that's always good news.
And one other question while your associate's getting prepared there. Did I understand you to say that you discussed or were open to discussing sight lines and so forth with the neighbors, but they weren't responsive? Or
So it was really.
What I thought I heard.
It was a very challenging community engagement exercise. I personally, again, these are never my properties, so I'm very empathetic to individuals, especially people in a situation like this. We all wouldn't like it. But there's another side of that coin, I think, that exists, and that's another part of the community engagement piece. As we went to the Citizens Advisory Board, the recommendation coming from the board was simply, well, don't develop on the parcel because we want to park in front of it. I mean, you can read the notes yourself. And I would pose that to any of the board members or anyone in the audience for that matter, if someone wanted to keep parking their truck in the county right away in front of your property and you couldn't develop it, well, that'd be great. I reached out so many times to the neighbors to say, if you have any suggestions, please give them to me. Anything. You know this area. You live there. Anything I can take back. And the first suggestion I got was, please give us 5 options and we'll pick from that. Like, that's not, it's a very challenging exercise to kind of create that ability to work with folks any more than we were really struggling to do, unless you can get some really definitive things from folks in which you can begin that process.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Ms. Exline? Ms. Hill.
What is the status of your lot line adjustment application in TRPA? Is it a requirement that that be approved prior to approval of the project?
Well, we haven't submitted to TRPA for the single-family residential.
Oh.
We were waiting because, to some degree, as I mentioned earlier, with all the scenic and all those things, if we had to, if this did not go in our favor, all that would completely change. So until this piece is done, submitting to TRPA, I wouldn't do it, and I wouldn't recommend others to do it either.
I have the letter from Julie Roll.
Oh, no. Are you the TRPA permit?
Yeah.
Oh, no. So the TRPA BLA permit. So we have a BLA permit, but we have not submitted for the single-family residence. Sorry, I misunderstood the question.
But here's a letter from Julie Roll at TRPA dated December 18th, 2019, regarding single-family dwelling on 470 Kawanawabi.
That's the abutting residence.
Oh, this isn't.
That's not the same parcel.
Oh, okay. I wonder why it's in our packet. I don't know. Sorry.
Mr. Stanley?
Was your associate going to get?
Oh, sorry. It's 86 per the proposed boundary line. So I guess that would alter Mr. Felton's.
So it's an addition of 26, is my math simple?
26 feet, correct.
Okay.
But again, I would really, the hardship is on the side is really the V-shaped ingress, egress to the parcel. I can't stress that enough. in combination with the slope.
All right,
Thank you so much for your time.
thank you. No further questions for this gentleman then? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Stanley.
Mr. Chair, this is a question to you, I think. I have a question about some of the definitions of what's required for variance and that it went with the land. I was wondering contractually if it would be appropriate to ask it just if it actually is part of the deed which runs with the land, like a deed would be, show all the easements and so forth. Would it be indicated that?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, can I, through the chair, Mr. Stanley, can you speak into the microphone? I think I'm having a hard time hearing what you're asking.
I understand that a lot of that's going around, but you should see some of the things I say in the notes or in the transcript. So did you understand my question?
No, go ahead and repeat that.
Okay. How about
Especially if we didn't capture it.
May I speak to legal then directly?
Sure.
Okay, so here's the question. You said it was part of the land, that it ran, you didn't use the term runs with the land. You said the fact that the parcel would be applicable, that a variance would be applicable, was defined by the shape of the land. So therefore, in a deed or something, does it run with the land? Does it say this parcel's under current code is it stipulated in any place in a deed? So does anyone know when they buy a property that it's either 60 or 86 feet wide, and that triggers code? Did I say that in English?
I'll do my best to answer that question, but typically you don't necessarily list all of the constraints within a deed. However, when a property owner does their due diligence, all of the constraints of the property and the hardships for building, that certainly becomes quite evident through the process. But the variance itself does run with the land. A variance would not be subjected to the property owner. It is passed, if, let's say, it's sold to another property owner, that does run with the land.
So do I understand that it runs with the land, but would not necessarily, probably wouldn't be part of a deed or mentioned in a deed, like easements or anything else would be?
If there was a variance, that would, and it was a house that was constructed, very likely that would be identified through the deed. It would be identified through a record search for the property. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll go ahead and, Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter?
We have Judy Miller, followed by Greg Gatto.
Is this the spot for, let's see, face up? Okay. Yes. All right. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Thanks, Roger. Good afternoon, once again, Judy Miller. I relied in good faith that a compromise with the neighbors could be reached after I sent my CAB worksheet to staff. But I respectfully disagree with the assertion that this project meets all requirements for a variance. More specifically, requirement 1, the special circumstances. I believe it's the applicant's responsibility to demonstrate that special circumstances create an undue hardship. Slope by itself, narrowness by itself, I don't think that satisfies the requirement. I did give this to you in writing, so you can read through it, but I called Julie Roll yesterday, and she told me, yes, there is a conditional permit for a lot line adjustment on the 3 parcels that are co-owned, and that is going to increase the width to 85 feet from, I think she said it was roughly 62 feet now. So that's a significant increase, and the lot size by more than 4,000 square feet. And And what really puzzles me is, I believe these plans show an 80-something foot width. This is not based on a 62-foot wide lot. In fact, it shows the line. It says after the proposed lot line adjustment. And, you know, as I said in my comment, I'm not an architect, but I tried the suggestion that was heard by me at the cab to flip the diagram. I'm sorry, my AutoCAD light from 2004, when I actually worked in the planning department in IT, it's not supported any longer. So I did my best to give you a drawing that would show you if, in fact, that flip happened. Then if you look at the pink lines, they're shorter than the blue lines, which are the existing distance to the road. What else? Okay, so you actually could push it back and then look at the contour, because the designer spoke about, well, if we move it further back, it's going to be further down the slope. The contour on that particular property shows that if you moved it back, you can see where the garage is, and the black line is the contour line. So on that side of the property, the contour line is quite a bit further back. So it probably wouldn't hurt to move it back another, I believe in my grade estimate, 1 centimeter is about 10 feet. So that black line is about 10 feet back from the corner of the garage. So really, I don't think you're talking about a lot to not even need a variance here, but I think my time's probably up. So I do recommend denial as the property, or as this plan was presented. Thank you.
Ms. Miller, hold on 1 second. I believe a board member wants to ask you a question. Mr. Toulouse?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Miller, could you step back to the mic, please?
Certainly.
I just wanted to ask you, you stated earlier you're a member of the CAB.
Yes.
And that you've been told that the CAB cannot make recommendations as a, I just am curious who is giving you those marching orders?
I received that information from Alice McQuone, who is the coordinator of the CAB program. In fact, she changed the language this month because I had a conversation with her that the directions, that the agenda items were not clear. It said that the vote or the action would be to recommend forwarding citizens and board comments to staff. And I said, well, that doesn't really rule out a recommendation. A board comment would have to be something voted on. So she said, oh no, you'd be violating the open meeting law. And then after my conversation, she said, well, I'll change it to board members' comments. In other words, we could no longer, under any circumstances, forward a board a voted upon action or recommendation. And so this month, it now says the only action we could take is to forward citizens and board members' comments. And I was sort of surprised to see apparently she hasn't made that mandate of the other cabs, since they're still voting on recommendations to approve or deny a project. This has been ongoing in our cab now for several months that I've been aware of it. So hopefully the language, and maybe our counsel, well, it's a different attorney, I believe, that handles the community services.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. I'll have to take that up with Mr. Lloyd after the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Next is Greg Gatto, followed by Monica Decker.
Good afternoon, Chair Thomas, honorable members of the board. My name is Greg Gatto, and I'm an attorney representing both the next door neighbor and the homeowner directly across the street from the subject property. I would like to ask for just a few extra seconds because I think there were some questions that were raised that I can maybe provide some clarification. The first thing I do want to touch on is there was a lot of dancing up here by the applicant, but there were no answers, and I think there were out and out misrepresentations. And I apologize, I'm a little heated about that right now. In fact, a boundary line adjustment has been submitted with the county. It's WBLA 19-0019. It's not contemplated. There's an application pending with the county now that I believe was submitted concurrently with the variance application. We have requested the public records, and we're going through those now, so, but they are with the county. I would also like to clarify, as Ms. Miller said, that TRPA has approved the boundary line adjustment for the 3 parcels. There is an approval, there's a pending appeal period right now for those parcels, so I wanted to clear that up. With regard to Board Member or Vice Chair Hill's question about the TRPA letter, I'll hope to address that as I get further into my comments. Primarily, I want to address the hardship question. And the law is pretty well settled. The applicant has a very heavy burden to prove by substantial evidence that both, one, because of extraordinary and special circumstances unique to the property, adherence to the setback requirements would result in exceptional and undue hardships. So it's not just the unique or exceptional circumstances we're looking at. There actually has to be a hardship that results from those circumstances. The Nevada Supreme Court has set a high standard for the type of hardship that will support a variance. Having to build a 4-bedroom rather than a 5-bedroom house, not being able to construct a bunk room or a media room or a wine cellar, those are the types of hardships that are going to support the issuance of a variance. The Supreme Court has opined that in order to obtain leave to deviate from established zoning standards, the applicant must prove that complying with setbacks would deprive him of all beneficial uses of the property or decrease the value of the property significantly. That showing cannot be made here. The applicant recently purchased this property with the setbacks in place, and the price paid reflected the value associated with those setbacks. Denial of the variance will not decrease the value of the property at all, nor deny the applicant of all beneficial uses of the property. As the comment letters from the Citizen Advisory Board acknowledge, the applicant has offered zero evidence of an exceptional and undue hardship that would result if it were required to build in conformance with the 15-front setback. Nor is there any evidence that the variance requested is the minimum departure necessary, which is required by law.
Mr. Gaddu, I'll tell you what, I will give you an additional 3 minutes. Hopefully you can make your point within that time.
I'm going quickly. Thank you very much, Chair Thomas. I appreciate that. I do want to address the one applicant, or the one hardship that Ms. Walton brought up relating to the garage and kind of the bridge driveway that goes there. That's very common in the area. That's not a unique design, and I think some of the neighbors can speak to that. The applicants also failed to prove any special circumstances that are unique to this property which support deviation from the setback requirements. The applicant cites slope as a constraint, yet similar slopes are encountered on many of the surrounding properties. In fact, the property right next door has nearly identical slopes and was able to construct a 2,500 square foot home. The residence proposed by the applicant is nearly 2.5 times as large. The staff report also points to the exceptional narrowness of the parcel, but I think that's been addressed. The parcel actually exceeds the minimum standards under the zoning ordinance with the lot line adjustment that's been approved by TRPA and that's pending before Washoe County. Given the utter lack of any exceptional and undue hardships or unique and special circumstances, a variance from the setback standards would result in a special privilege to this property and should be denied. Finally, the applicant's asking you to approve a variance to a design that it should know TRPA will not approve. The applicant has already submitted 2 building plans for the adjoining parcels, and those are the letters that you have in your package. Both of those building plans were rejected as incomplete because they don't meet the height standards. And the current plans contain the same error. Under the TRPA segmented height standards, the building segment closest to the street may not exceed 28 feet, as measured from the lowest point of the structure to the highest point of the roof pitch. The roof pitch of this garage is almost 40 feet from the ground level and cannot be approved as designed. In sum, as a matter of law, this variance cannot be approved, and we respectfully request that this board deny the variance application. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Monica Decker, followed by Reuben Richards.
All right, good afternoon. I'll try and keep this quick. I've learned so much today. Chairman Thomas, Mr. Stanley, Ms. Hill, and Mr. Toulouse. I emailed you last night. I hope you read it. It outlines my opposition to this as a resident and homeowner on Ganawabi. Despite the fact that I emailed you last night, I just wanted to be here in support with the community members and say verbally to you in person my strong opposition for this variance setback. Thank you.
Excuse me, before you go, would you, for the record, go ahead and list your concerns for us?
Sure. The concerns are around the access for emergency vehicles, public parking, and those are the main ones. Any other questions?
Nope. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Next is Reuben Richards, followed by Uli Reynolds.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board. My name is Reuben Richards. I'm the owner of 458 Ganawabi. I am the parcel directly south of 460, and probably the residence that is going to be most significantly impacted by this. I have a number of comments. None of them really have to do with code, but you know, we, since the CAB, it was our impression that their direction was for the developer and for the community to sit down and try and work out, you know, a solution that would be acceptable to all parties. Understand that this is a developer. He's got 3 lots. He's trying to cram in as many square feet as he possibly can onto a road that is largely the size of a fire lane. So there are a lot of health and safety issues that are very well founded here. And as a result, we engaged with the developers' representatives, and we were asked, you know, what would our suggestions be? And we're not architects. You know, we don't know how to design their house for them, but the lot is something that all of the neighborhood is familiar with. And it's been for sale for a long time. And the restrictions and difficulties of developing 3 properties on Ganawabi clearly reflected in the price that was paid for the land. So the CAB asked us to get together. We were asked what our plan was. We don't know what the developer wants or what, and we're not designers. We can't do that. And a lot of the things I heard earlier, I would have to characterize as disingenuous. I mean, we were told that, for instance, this meeting was going to be tabled and deferred so that there are a fair number of people in the community who would have been here to voice their opinions, who then made other plans when it was, you know, at the last minute kept on the agenda. So we've had some difficulties with the developer in getting together and trying to resolve this. Look, we understand he's got a right to build something there, but he also needs to respect the health and safety of the community and do things which are within within those parameters. And this road has never seen a development like this. And you know, as a result, you know, we started this process not knowing whether we supported this or not. We didn't know enough. And we had hoped through this process to get a better understanding of what was going on and what the potential solutions were. But we are now We're not at that point. And it
All right.
doesn't appear to us that we'll get there.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Lee Reynolds, followed by Dave Ehrlich.
Good afternoon. I try to keep it short. We just recently moved to 320 Anaho Road, which is above the site. And as we know, the Godawabi has actually a 15-mile speed limit, and it's very, people start driving faster. A lot of times they exceed the speed limits. And also, it's very curvy. There's a sharp curve around it before the property, and people actually have to back up. It's really a safety issue, what we're concerned about. So the primary concern here is basically the safety of the residents of our neighborhood. And the site in question, the 460 Gonawabi site, sits around the bend in the road that we drive practically every day. And moving the front yard setback from the required 20 feet to 6.6 feet, which is about the height of my husband, could create actually a hazard directly on the street. And since the average SUV is over 15 feet long, vehicles, like I said, have to excessively maneuver and sometimes back up to actually get through the street. And where the garage would be, they might actually have to back up because they cannot go around. And so approving this deviation would create a very real safety hazard, and it is in the best interest of current and the future residents to have the 20-foot standard enforced. And thereby, we oppose it, or I oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is David Ehrlich, followed by Will Alder.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and all the members of the board, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is David Ehrlich, and I live at 340 Gonawabi, which is up above the proposed development. I was one of the ones who had to change my plans. I was on vacation in San Diego, and I changed my plans last night when I heard that the meeting was back on, so I wanted to take this opportunity to talk to you. I've reviewed the application from the developer and the staff report. I've talked to Roger, and I've read the attorney's, Greg's letter. I was going to read off a paragraph or two that I had written, but Mr. Toulouse, I want to say thank you for asking that question, because you hit the crux of the whole issue. These guys do not want a longer driveway because they want a bigger house. And that's just, let's just cut through all the fluff. That's the issue. And so this developer bought this lot knowing the setback, paid a price accordingly, and now he wants your help to increase the profit. And my house is 1,600 feet. We don't have a lot of big houses, huge houses on Gonawabi. These three are going to be monsters. So I don't think this is in setting with the neighborhood, and I don't think it's fair, and I don't think these guys have acted in good faith, which makes me wonder, when they start building, what's going to happen then? Because it hasn't been good faith going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Will Adler, followed by Robert Goldberg.
Hello, everyone. My name is Will Adler, and I am with Silver State Government Relations. I was going to stay in the bleachers there, but kindly, the applicant here challenged everyone in the audience today to step forward if they thought otherwise. So I'm here. They got me out of the back seat. So first of all, I used to be a contractor in the Lake Tahoe area, and this is called a simultaneous development. You grab three parcels that are pretty crappy right next to each other with, wonky lot lines or whatever, and you either make 2 out of 3, or you move them around a little bit to get the width you need on one lot. I mean, this is very obvious what they're doing here, right? They've also filed for a lot line adjustment at the exact same time, yet told you they have no idea about this lot line adjustment. Weird story, guys, right? Then they say, we don't know, and it's in the plan. I'm like, yeah, that's a weird thing not to know in your own plan. Hilarious, right? In my other life, too, I am a lobbyist and a government relations guy who goes in front of this very microphone very often. And I've never once used a staff member's name and last name repeatedly as the applicant. I say staff in general. It is like you have a staff member fighting for this applicant here, no offense, but like they filed for this variance too on Christmas Eve. And yet said, we want nothing but public inclusion and participation in the process. You don't file for something on a holiday eve unless you want somebody not to notice it and you want to smother it, right? So the regards of acting in good faith, acting for the good of the community and trying to work with the community, I would say are very much so misrepresented today. But I would thank them for asking everyone in the audience to say otherwise, because I will say otherwise. And I have no particular dog in this fight, but I was asked to observe these proceedings today, and yeah, they're quite something. So I would say this seems to be over and above to ask for variance for this because of all the other pieces in this puzzle, right? If you take it on its own, yeah, maybe it's justifiable, but with the other things coming down the line, with the other rejections from TRPA already done, this can't be taken as a solo project. You have to take it from what they're doing all together, right? So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Next is Robert Goldberg, followed by, I'm going to probably massacre this, Ardith McCracken.
Robert Goldberg for the record. Thank you, Chair and board members. Very much appreciate your service to the community, and I have a little flavor of how difficult that is. I serve on the University of Nevada, Reno NVRIC board, and I also serve on the EDON Economic Development Board. And as such, you can imagine that I am not anti-development, but I am about thoughtful development. And the pleasure of going last, I guess, or next to last, is everybody pretty much covered everything. I did want to cover 2 points. I think some of those were covered by Ruben and Will, but I think we are not against development or the rights of the developer to develop the property and make money on the development. And in fact, you'll see in your packets that we reached out to the applicant early in the process to actually start a conversation to see if we could understand the project better. My best characterization of that is the Heisman. I mean, we were stiff-armed at pretty much every opportunity, asked to submit our plans, our adjustments when they had already captured mostly our concerns. So that's just I think a complete fabrication. We never said give us five plans. We actually asked to sit down with their architects and developers to look at alternative plans to see if we could come up with anything. But magically, that never happened. But today we see those plans, which I think are actually, by the way, from what I can eyeball, non-compliant with either TRPA or any other standards. But they got somehow magically produced today. The last thing I would say is with the lot line adjustment, I think it was either Mr. Stanley or Mr. Toulouse asked about the elimination of the parking. As it turns out, that once a lot line adjustment is made, there is more than enough room on the far end of the property. Again, we're not architects or planners, but to the untrained eye, there would be more than enough room at the far end of the property to, in fact, actually not impede the current parking pad at all, but apparently they want to maximize the building envelope of the property. And the final thing is the county code, which we're completely supportive of, which is that you have to have a single car garage. That means a single width driveway. So you could design this with a single width driveway that would have less impact on the street as opposed to a double width driveway. So I hate to be negative, but, I think there are a bunch of misstatements that have been made during the course of the applicant's presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Ardith McCracken.
Hello, I am Ardith McCracken. I'm a resident at 418 Ganawabi, which is several lots south of the 460 Ganawabi. I thank you for letting me speak, and I wish to apologize for not getting my letter to you earlier. I brought it with me today, and I'll read part of it for you now. I strongly object to the proposed setback variance. And aside from the applicant's impertinence and attempt to mislead the neighbors, I think that there, as been stated by others, there is no evidence that the application or that the applicant will experience undue hardships by not having this variance. But what is evident is that the negative impact of this variance, although in particular affects the parking on Ganawabi, because the idea would be to remove parking spaces from the only parking space we have on this road. And that would lead to visitors and guests of residents to park someplace that would impede the use of the road for public safety, in particular, the use of emergency vehicles. And in case of fire, there would be extreme problems. So I think that the neighbors here have spoken to you on their concerns, and that's a major concern of mine. There are others, but there would have been other neighbors here. And that would suggest to you that this is a neighborhood that is concerned for each other, and we feel that this variance should not be approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is no further public comment.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. With that, we'll go ahead and bring it back to the board for discussion. Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I have to comment on something Mr. Adler said. He seemed to call in to question the integrity of staff, and that really makes me hot, because I've worked with the staff for a long, long time, and they are above reproach. They are honest, hardworking, and do a great job. So there should absolutely be no question of Roger's integrity or anyone else in planning and development. So I just wanted to make that clear. That being said, I'm struggling to make the findings necessary to approve this particular variance. We do a lot of variances, and we've done a lot of variances on Ganawabi Road, and particularly around Lake Tahoe. With this particular one, I'm struggling with the special circumstances, and I'm struggling to find that it would not be detrimental to the public good up in the area. As far as the parking issue goes, I'm sorry, it's their property. You can't really deal with that too terribly much. I also find that if we did grant this particular variance, it would grant a special privilege in this particular case. And so, Mr. Chair, I'm opposed to this variance.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Mr. Stanley.
Yeah, I appreciate everything that Mr. Toulouse, Member Toulouse has just mentioned, but I heard the remarks about planning a bit differently, and what I heard was that they were being kind of expropriated, actually, to be used as advertising for the project, not that they had actually done that. So in either case, though, it was absolutely, certainly a little annoying and off-putting. I have an issue and concerns as we learn more and more about the boundary line adjustment and some of the other things that weren't available to us initially and then kind of grew. That's an issue for me. The other thing that I think I heard was that the plans that are in our package on which we were to decide are in fact are inaccurate in some way. And if that's the case, that makes it a really tough one to favorably vote for something that has kind of a substantial inaccuracy in the package as well. And then just a point so I'm having heartburn on this. The other point, and I think it's just a detail that I was wondering about, the lady who mentioned, and I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name, sending an email. I'm an email guy, and I didn't see email. So does that, do we have to get that on the record somehow, or what's the process there, if you don't mind my asking?
It was handed out to you. It was handed out to you in at the dais.
Okay, so it's up here? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So those are my opinions on how this has been so far.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Hill.
I'd like to echo my concern regarding the lot line adjustment. And if the plans that we have in our packet are actually designed for an 80-foot wide lot, that seems to discount the special circumstances because of narrowness. And also that as a representative of Incline Village, and I used to go down Ganawabi with my little kids because it was the super duper secret way to go. And it's the cutest road with the old houses and, I don't see many 6,000 square foot houses on that road. And a lot of them are old timey cabins. And as you can see from some of the photos in the presentation, but I'm having a hard time approving a 6,000 square foot house and on this little narrow street, with very limited parking. It just seems like it's not a hardship. It could be a modest home and fit within the setbacks. And I know we're not designers and we're not here to tell people what to do, but I think there are alternatives that would be able to make the setback requirements. That's it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, and members of the commission.
Large.
The boundary line adjustment is not in front of this board.
No, I know.
And what in terms of making a decision on this, in terms of with the application that is in front of us in regard to this, the findings need to be separate from any consideration of the boundary line adjustment.
I'd just like to say I agree with you on that, but if the plans in our packet show an 80-foot wide lot, and it's represented that the lot is only 62 feet, then I think we are unable to read these plans, so we don't know.
Mr. Large, I understand where you're coming from, but my concern is I think for us to make a accurate decision, we would need accurate facts. And so therefore, if there is information that is inaccurate within our packet, we need to either bring the applicant back up or clarify that before we make it.
And Mr. Chairman, that would be my recommendation. We heard from the public that this was designed as a 82 or 85 foot wide design. I would suggest bringing the applicant back up or Mr. Pelham to discuss that matter. And because as it stands right now in terms of the packet that's in front of you, the boundary line adjustment is not there. And so we can't really consider that.
Thank you, Mr. Large. That was going to be my plan when it was my time to talk, but thank you for giving us the guidance. We have a bit of a discrepancy here as to this lot line adjustment that's been testified before us from the public. Mr. Eckline, would you please come back up and see if you can clarify that for us? Is the lot line adjustment, does this paperwork reflect that, or does it not reflect that?
I believe it does. I haven't had the chance to go through and, I'm taking people at their face value. It's hard for me to imagine people would be dishonest. If I could take a guess as to why, it would be that they wanted to show the project as it would be per completion if the boundary line adjustment was permitted. With this project prior to TRPA approval, something we were very aware of was the fact that if alterations had to take place, because as you're existing in the regulatory permitting development process in Tahoe, most of these things happen to go concurrently. And the reason being is otherwise you could never develop a single family residence in Tahoe. And so what's very important is we were very aware that if alterations take place, and it says it within the staff report unto itself, if alterations take place within the, to the residence, and it's not, I think, substantially conforms, that we would potentially have to go back before this body. So if I was to guess exactly how this came to fruition, it was to represent what it would be per build out if the boundary line adjustment is completed.
Okay, so this, if I understand you correctly, this, the documentation, the plan that we have before us actually does reflect the lot line adjustment out to about 84 feet.
That's what I've been informed, yes.
Okay, because that was not what we were under the, or I was not under the impression that that was what had happened, but okay.
Yeah,
All right, thank you.
it's a big
I do
lot.
appreciate that. I guess where I would jump in here now is I tend to concur with my fellow board members. When you bring up parking, if you're the owner of the property and it's going to take away from parking, I hate to say that, but so be it. That's their property. They have every right to do that. It's nice to have a vacant lot sitting next to you where you can park a lot of stuff, but when someone owns it and decides to do something with it, that's a separate issue. I really think here what we're trying to do is we're trying to put a square peg into a round hole. We have a piece of property that is a certain size, and we've decided to take a residence and drop it on there and then come forward and ask for adjustments for that or variances for that. I don't believe the requirements have been met, in my opinion, for all the findings necessary basically to move this forward. That is just, of course, my opinion, and with that, we will go ahead and, unless there is any further discussion.
No?
Is that, you wish to speak there, Mr. Stanley?
I do. I just wanted to confirm one thing, and you went over it with the applicant, but I kind of missed some of the verbs, I think. Was it determined that what's in our package doesn't represent a home being built on a lot 60 feet wide with the inherent problems? So what we have in our package doesn't represent the existing world.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
That is what I believe to be correct.
Okay. Thank you.
With that, I will entertain a motion. Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that after giving reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and information received during the public hearing, the Washoe County Board of Adjustment deny variance case number WPVAR 19-0002 for Ganawabi Properties with the conditions of the denial included for this matter having been unable to make all four findings in accordance with the Washoe County Development Code Section 110.804.25. The findings I am unable to make are special circumstances and no detriment and no special privileges.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Hill, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Or, I'm sorry, the denial passes unanimously. All right. With that, we will go ahead and move on to chair and board items. Item number 10A, future agenda items. Does the board have any future agenda items?
I can predict one.
That's what we're looking at.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Toulouse.
I would like to have an agenda item at our next meeting of Soleil grading. And the reason I would like to have that, there are multiple reasons I would like to have that brought back before the board. The staff asked for some thought on the conditions of approval that I have issues with, and those would be 1C, 1E, 1F, 2C, 2GA, and there's another G there, Trevor. There's two Gs, so the second G as well. 2H, and it's actually 2HA. I don't believe those conditions of approval have been met, and that is why I would like to see that on the agenda for our next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Toulouse. I concur, and I would also recommend that the rest of the board review the document in further detail. And if you have additional concerns, please make sure that we get it to staff so that can be on the, included in the agenda. Mr. Stanley.
Would it be included in this item, or would it be separate items that follow-up review by the county on progress after some of these issues are addressed, I think was brought up? And another issue that was brought up by me was, what is the, how does the county interface, and to what extent does the county jurisdiction augment or conflict with or support, and which one is a subordinate set of issues to state and federal agencies? So are those one issue, or are they multiple separates?
Well, I think that is something that you can forward to staff and ask for clarification on.
I was trying.
I think that would be it as to what lane we're in, is that right?
I think what lane and what does our lane do?
Thank you, I appreciate that.
If I could follow up on Board Member Toulouse's questions, and he identified multiple conditions. It is staff's contention that these conditions have been adhered to. So if I could ask Mr. Toulouse in a follow-up email, provide detail as to your understanding how you feel these conditions have not been met, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I will forward an email to both you and Ms. Olander, clarifying my questions. I think the one condition that there shouldn't be any question about was the condition requiring the applicant to come back in October of 2019, and that has not occurred, so I don't think I need to forward that one to you.
That is correct.
But the rest of them, I will clarify my concerns and forward it to both you and Ms. Olander.
Thank you.
I would, before Ms. Hill steps in, I would discourage you from sending that email to all of the commissioners and allow staff to disseminate that with the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Large. I will make sure that it is not distributed to...
Public records and open meeting law.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Large. I appreciate that.
I would like to also recommend that we go by the site and check it out, not together, but individually and see. Yeah, I mean, I was really shocked in 2018 when I saw the property, and from the pictures I've seen, it doesn't look like anything really as much has changed. And I realize it takes a while for vegetation to grow, but you got to plant it in order for it to grow.
Right.
Admittedly, I drove by the site as well yesterday, so.
Yes. Mr. Stanley?
I'm going to ask for a repetition or a clarification. Are you saying that Mr. Toulouse's email is not coming to us, but is going directly to you?
Yeah, sorry.
Is that essentially it?
Mr. Stanley,
So-
what I'm encouraging is that this board not email each other. That becomes what we like to call a collective open meeting law
meeting law,
violation
yeah,
in regard to communications that are happening outside of the public sphere. We want to keep this board open. Anything, conversations with staff by individual commissioners is fine, but conversations that include all of us or all the board members are discouraged, and you can't not do that. That will be an open meeting law violation.
So I guess my question is a mechanical one. How will we know, for an example, Mr. Toulouse named 4 or 5 or 6 different species and subspecies that are supposed to be there, they're not there, and also actually referred to caliper, as I recall. And I know we're supposed to wait till they grow, but you have to start, kind of accelerate that by the appropriate caliper. So how will we know what he's already saying?
Well,
Mr. Larger, I think I can clarify that if I could. Mr. Stanley, I think what Mr. Large is saying is that I'm going to send an email to Trevor and yes.
Julie.
That email will be sent out to the rest of the board from planning and development. So there's no question that there's any communication about the case between commissioners outside of a public meeting.
What I would suggest is that, and feel free, all of the board members, to as well submit any questions or concerns, and then staff will gather all of them and submit to the entire board. And so you all have an understanding of what the issues are coming back to you. Thank you.
Yes, I believe it's okay to be repetitive in asking the same question, and what they'll do is they'll put it together and then ask it as one cohesive question from the group. So it's okay if there is overlap, but you'll be responsible for your own questions that you may have. Mr. Stanley?
And the mechanics of Mr. Lawrence contributing to this, he'll be advised that this is a to-do item for us then?
I would,
It
yeah,
has
I think
certain expertise
I
and
believe, Mr. Lawrence is aware of this, and it was involved in some of the past situations that we've had, so I would probably leave it up to the Director of Planning or staff to contact Mr. Lawrence and see if he wishes to add anything. So, okay, anything else on that item? A couple other things I would just like to mention, and I don't know if this is a future agenda item or whatever, but I know it was brought up, Mr. Toulouse spoke to it, as to some of these cabs are under the belief that they cannot vote on a topic, which is kind of interesting, because evidently the Incline Village didn't vote on a topic, but every other one that we heard actually did vote on the topic.
Mr. Chairman, Michael Large for the record, we will address that with staff and with that cab, because that is not my understanding of how the cabs operate.
Right.
And if that is being instructed, then there needs to be some clarification. Because my understanding is they do vote both at planning and for the Board of Adjustment to make recommendations or denials on applications, and they have that power. They are specifically empowered by county code to do so.
Yes, and I do appreciate that, and yes, I think that is an issue that needs to be addressed, because I, for one, do pay attention to what the cab has to say and the direction that they're going also. So I would, just getting the, the letters from the cab of people, this is what we heard, doesn't really solidify or represent really what the cab is, who is representing a larger entity of what direction they believe is appropriate. So I thank you for that. I appreciate that.
And to add to that, I know that Incline and Mr. Todoroff in particular are pretty adamant about voting traditionally, and are certainly kind of aggressive in taking up their responsibility. So there's definitely some weirdness that happened.
I don't know what the issue is there. We will clarify.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. Okay, that was either a future agenda items and B, request for information from staff. I'm going to throw this out here, and I know it's getting late, but we've had issues in the past where we're as the county grows, the need for communication also grows. And we've had various wireless services come before us and ask for, monopoles or whatever to do that. And we're faced with the term significant gap. And I don't know if maybe this is just a discussion or a presentation from someone that can maybe clarify that. I don't know if that's really, I know what it is. Maybe Mr. Large can guide us now or maybe even into the future if, in those situations. I mean, I'll accept that also.
Mr. Chairman, I understand your question, and I know that we had spoke on the phone in regard to this. I think that's a presentation for legal counsel and for the director to address in regard to whether or not our ordinances need to be updated and to come into compliance with the FCC regulations in regard to the significant gap in coverage, and whether our current existing code, which says that no coverage versus preference of one carrier versus another carrier, is still, we still have the ability to regulate in that area. There's a certain thing called federal preemption, which if the FCC has regulated in a certain area, the county is not allowed to. And part of our design and part of our problems with our Washoe County Code is it was written 20 years ago. And so some of the current regulations are not reflected in FCC regulations are not reflected in it. I say that by saying it may be a few months before we can bring that item back to you because it is a complicated issue and it needs a lot of analysis and clarification. And it may be more appropriate to be brought forward in a portion of a code amendment to the Washoe County Board of County Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Large, and as we wait for that to happen, we will just rely on your expertise when we have questions in that arena.
Plead ignorance yet again.
Thank you very much, sir. Number 11 is Director's Legal Counsel items, report on previous Board of Adjustment items. Mr. Lloyd, you have anything for us?
Nothing to report.
Thank you kindly. Second is legal information and updates. Mr. Large?
Nothing to report.
Thank you kindly. Next, we move on to general public comment, discussion thereof. Madam Secretary, is there anyone wishing to speak at this time?
We have Will Alder.
Thank you. Mr. Alder?
Will Adler back. I would like to thank Mr. Toulouse for your comments, sir, because that was not my intention with that. I was trying to state that, I feel this a lot because I'm on that side of it as the applicant or the developer, that staff reports aren't yours, right? Staff time is public time. You don't advocate for just that one project, and there were other sides of this coin. And I was trying to say, that a smaller house could be built. It doesn't have to be this project, in its entirety and its intactness, advocate outside, but thank you, and I was mistaking that over the line, so I thank you for that, and I apologize. I'm in front of Washoe County frequently, and I work with Washoe County staff constantly, and I do appreciate all of them, and I've worked with him before, actually. So thank you very much, and appreciate your time and what you guys do. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Chair, may I say something real quick?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Alder, for that clarification. I appreciate it. And I just want to say again and reiterate that.
I was getting too high, I got it.
I'm going to always stick up for the staff in those situations, so.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you for doing
Thank you.
that, too. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you very much.
See you.
Madam Secretary, is there anyone else wishing to speak?
We have no further public comment.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comment. And last but not least, I would like to recommend that all board members please retain your packets that deal with item A, E, and the Mr. Soule grading document. Hopefully we don't need to kill a whole bunch of more trees, and we'll hear those next time. With that, we are adjourned.